All right, in this episode, we're talking all about how to improve hiking performance, how to hike faster, how to hike more efficient. Uh, Dude, I'm super pumped to get into this. How do you feel?
I feel pretty stoked. I'm looking at all the different topics that we're going to get into and thinking about the amount of conversations surrounding hiking that wildland firefighters get into without diving into all these different scientific principles surrounding hiking. I think it's going to be a cool one for some people to just explore the realms of what the demands of hiking truly are and how we can systematically build up to become better hikers. I think it's a cool conversation. It's one that needs to happen more and give people a foundation for this task, how you can improve and how you can sustain it over the course of a long, long career of doing millions of cycles of steps. So I'm stoked.
Yeah. Yeah, this is episode 4. I wanted to get to this topic early because I honestly think this is how to hike faster, how to improve your hiking. I think that's the most common question I get, just with like in terms of random DMs or even like random emails I'll get, which I get quite a bit of DMs. People just like, hey, yeah, I've got a question about whatever. Most of the time, it's on hiking. So I think this is the perfect topic to really like dive deep into it. Before we get into kind of like what we're going to talk about, just a quick plug to one of our educational resources we built called High Performance Hiking. Uh, the vast majority of the content that we're going to talk about is coming from that course. I spent a lot of time putting that together. It's a very in-depth course that looks at hiking performance from a ton of different angles. So a lot of the stuff that we're covering here, it's coming from that. So if this podcast episode helps you and you want more, go check out the high performance hiking course. There's going to be a link to check it out in the description and the show notes. So just had to plug that real quick. So kind of my plan for this episode is first I want to talk about work capacity because that's what hiking is. Hiking is a work capacity type of physical training. And we're going to define it. We're going to talk about some different key principles that I utilize to develop work capacity. And then I think the fun part for me and you, maybe not as much for the listeners because it's a little more sciencey and nerdy, but I want to go into the metabolic demands of hiking. We've got some research studies that we're gonna cover and just kind of talk about what those means or what the results mean. And then to finish it off, Justin, you've got some training principles, which I'm excited for you to go into. So we'll talk about, okay, we learned what work capacity is. We learned what the demands of hiking are. And then we'll kind of touch up a little bit at the end of how do we apply this information. So I think that'll be good. Make sure you stick around to the end. I want to start off with defining work capacity. And I always like to start with this because I've been a strength coach for a long time. I think coming up on 12 years, or it's been 12 years coming up on 13. I don't know. I lost track. But I've been around for a while and I have yet to really see like a solid definition of work capacity that I see it. I'm like, I like that. I'm going to use that. And so because of that, or because of the lack of definition, I created my own. I just defined it myself. So who knows how good it is compared to others, but I think it's good. And actually, to even one up that, I've got two definitions. I've got kind of like a formal definition, and then I have like a more informal. So my formal definition is the ability to tolerate load under high metabolic and cardiorespiratory demands. So I think the key words there are load and then the different types of demands, metabolic and cardiorespiratory. So we'll go into those. But I like to use my informal definition more, which is just resisted conditioning. Because I think at the end of the day, that makes sense in my brain. Hopefully it makes sense in like everyone else's brain. Because that's what it is. It's conditioning, it's cardiorespiratory demands, but there is that load component or that resistance component, and that's where it's just that combination of strength and endurance kind of all happening at once, which I think is really really unique, and doesn't really get trained a whole lot in certain contexts. So, how do those? Do you like the formal or informal one better?
I like I kind of like your formal one, and I think the work capacity concept is just a hard one to define because it really just represents the most jack of all trades adaptation you could ever talk about. It's really just
Yeah.
how robust are you systematically from cardiovascular to nervous system to muscular system to be able to perform an output for as long as humanly possible, which in the case of wildland firefighting is the name of the game. I think this is the most important adaptation for wildland firefighters to seek, potentially. And it really doesn't have to do with any one singular adaptation. It's how resilient are you for the demands that you're under, whether it's cutting line, whether it's hiking, whether it's just extended work for 30 hours. Just can you keep performing while you're enduring the most fatigue, the most metabolic byproduct, just like the harshest physiological environments internally? Can you keep going? So just jack of all trades, who's going to endure the most suck today? Like that's work capacity to me.
Yeah, it I like that endure in the most suck,
I knew you would.
because it is, yeah. There's so many different demands kind of all interplaying at once that if you have a weakness within any of those demands, like it's going to show. So you kind of have to be, you know, a jack of all trades, master of none, and to a certain extent when it comes to work capacity. Because I mean, every once in a while you see it. Someone's on one far end of the spectrum, like they can their endurance is off the charts. They can go for days, but then you throw a 50-pound pack on their back and they just fold, right? Because they just have no ability to tolerate those higher loads. Or on the other end, like you have the guy that can just throw weight around like it's nothing, but he's good for only a few reps. And then, a set of 5 is like high volume for him. So you kind of can't be like too extreme. You have to be in the sweet spot in the middle when it comes to work capacity. So kind of going off of that, I want to go into what I created as kind of my 3 key principles when it comes to developing work capacity. And actually, I want to back up real quick before I go into these principles. We're talking about hiking, right? And hiking, absolutely falls into the work capacity bucket, in my opinion, because it is everyone listening to this knows, like, your lungs and your heart rate are maxed out, when you're going on a hard hike. Your legs, like your muscles are maxed out. So it's this, we're talking about like strength, we're talking about endurance, we're talking about hiking, but there are a lot of other kind of components of work capacity or styles of training. So just so that we're all kind of on the same page, when I'm thinking about like developing work capacity from a PT standpoint, I'm talking about hiking, but I can also talk about like erg machines, like the rower, the ski erg, air bike. Those fit perfectly into the work capacity category. It's that high cardiorespiratory, but there's also that resistance component. You can look at like, hate it or love it, like look at CrossFit, like all the CrossFit Metcons you see, the AMRAPs, the 4-time workouts, like those are all work capacity, because even if you're doing body weight movements, you're still doing resistance training, and you're doing it at high volumes with high cardio demands. So all of that falls into work capacity development. So when we're going through these principles, that's kind of what I want you to think about. Obviously, you can prioritize hiking in your mind of how you're taking all this in, but you can also take it in from more of a broad perspective. So I wanted to say that before I jump in. Jumping into key principle number 1 is specificity. Stealing a quote from my buddy Nate Palin over at Any Given Day. He says this a lot, and I love it. He says, if you want to get better at the thing, go and do the damn thing. And what he's meaning, to put it into this context, like if you want to get better at hiking, up and down steep stuff with a heavy pack on your back, the best way, the most effective way to get better at that task is to go hike up and down steep stuff with a heavy pack on your back. It's just the best way. Now, I get in trouble on social media every once in a while because I like to point out the fact that when it comes to getting better at hiking, you don't need to hike every day. There are other things that you can do and should do in your PT that aren't just hiking every single day. But I'll say this. I always make sure to include nuance when I throw out these hot takes on social media, and I always include the principle of specificity. Never fails. People don't listen to that part. They just see my they just get hooked by my controversial, hook on social media, which, sorry, that's just the social media game. That's just how you have to present information now for people to listen. So I don't know. Have you seen any of those comments on like any of my posts?
I love the ones that are like contradictory to themselves. I see more where like people actually agree with you, but they argue against
Yeah.
you, than ones that are actually like a valid argument against what you're saying. I think it's like just an immediate, oh, there's a new guy talking about this shit, I'm gonna get him.
Yeah, and then
That
they're
kind
like,
of,
and then I'm like, can you explain? And then they explain. I'm like, that's what I said. Are we saying the same thing?
whether we're talking about firefighters or practitioners themselves, it's happened several times now. So just pointing that out for folks listening. I don't think many of you disagree with Austin as much as you agree with him.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, some people do. Don't get me wrong. I get that quite a bit too. But I'll put this as the first principle because it is the most important. Like specificity. It like none of my programming is above the principle of specificity. Like it's really hard to get better at hiking if there's zero hiking present. It's like you have to hike. Now I think most people hike probably too much, and they can scale it back, reduce some of the hiking, and add some other stuff. That's going to be more effective. And I don't want to get off on a tangent on that. I've got a whole long form video on program design for hiking where I go into all the reasons why, which is free. It's free. It's a free download on the website. So I'll put a link for that as well. So if you want to go deep dive into program design, go check that out. But I just want to make it clear, principle of specificity, you got to hike. Despite the hot takes I might throw out there on social media. So that's principle number one. Principle number two.
I got a couple
Yeah,
things on specificity
yeah.
just
Go
to
ahead.
add since
We're
I
gonna
don't
move
like
on.
to backtrack too much. I just have a couple ideas that come to mind that might paint a better picture for folks who are still maybe like vague in the specificity concept. The principle that I think really puts a grounding kind of force together for like why specificity is so important is the principle of SAID, specific adaptations to imposed demands.
Yep.
Our body does not adapt unless we tell it to in a very specific way. So when we are talking about why you need to hike with a pack on uneven terrain, in heat, with awkward loads, with asymmetrical loads, a saw on your shoulder, all those things are separate adaptations that need to be met for those skills to be developed. There's a coordination piece to it. There's a metabolic piece to it. There's a muscular piece to it. There's all these different things that need to come together for us to adapt and be able to do that task. And if we don't get those specific joint angles, those specific speeds, those specific ground reaction forces, like those are all things that we'll dive into later. But just giving you the heads up, there's a lot of shit going on in the task of hiking. It's very kind of overlooked, I think, in this field of how complex of a motor skill this truly is. Hiking with 60 pounds on your back on really shitty terrain is not simple. So creating that specificity is what allows people to be a good hiker. But on the other end of the spectrum, I like to point out the other side, where specificity is really a spectrum. There's not necessarily always a need to be like nail on the head. I need to do that exact activity 12 months out of the year to get good at it. We can break this task down into its constituent parts a little bit. We can
Yeah.
build up systems. We can hammer on certain levers at certain times, at certain phases of the year, and get to the point where we've created an added capacity in each one of those respective systems, like our muscular strength, like our ability to absorb forces, like our postural control and our core stability, like our aerobic base. Like all these things add to hiking and will be a force multiplier for you. So those are my two arguments for specificity. There's the complete like need to have the specific adaptations to those demands, but there's also ways to not necessarily have to get bottlenecked like some folks might feel they need to, where hiking is hiking, load carriage is load carriage. There's like always kind of a half truth with specificity to me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the great. I think you said a lot of great things. The coordination piece, I think, stood out to me of like, and that's a good transition into this next topic of, just being more efficient with your movement. Cause I think that's a very, very underrated aspect to, you know, looking at physical training in general, but especially for a specific task. Like I'm trying to improve my hiking performance specifically. Because when it comes to prioritizing movement efficiency, I said it gets overlooked. And I think it's because when it's easy to think about work capacity is in like, or if I'm improving my work capacity, I'm improving my ability just to do more work, which it is. That is probably the main aspect of work capacity. But on the other side of that, kind of the same thing, but different, you can do this. Improving your work capacity is like doing the same amount of work, but it just takes you significantly less time. You're just more efficient. You put in less effort. You waste less energy. You're just more fluid, more smooth. And not only does that help you just be more productive, like you do the work faster, but it also reduces that unnecessary stress. And so now we're reducing our injury risk just because we're being more efficient with our movement patterns. So there's a couple things. What I have four things written down that I want to touch on specifically when it comes to just hiking more efficiently. And the first one, we've already talked about this on a previous episode, is just the fact that like how much hiking is a high volume activity. Like if you think about, well, you can just even look at your phone or your watch, look how many steps you're taking on a normal shift. Like we're talking 10, 15, sometimes over 20,000 steps in a shift, with the vast majority of those being, under heavy load on some awkward, steep terrain. So if you have poor efficiency, if you're not moving well, times that by thousands, and that is all of the unnecessary, unwanted stress that you're just adding onto your skeletal system, your muscular system, all of these different systems. Like little improvements in your movement efficiency go a long way. Because like I said, we're timesing by thousands, and that's just on one shift. Times that by 14, and then a full season, and then a career. Like you can scale it out huge. So just have like little things to making each step as good as it can possibly be has a massive ROI. I've got a couple examples of how to improve, each step. One is just like, do I take big steps or do I take small steps? Like, I know some of these are going to sound like common sense of just like, whatever, it's just a step. But, man, like I said, if you're taking just 5 or 10 big steps when you could be taking 20 to 25 smaller steps, think about it in terms of like a weight room exercise. Think about how much easier it is to do just like a step up going up just a flight of stairs versus a step up going onto a 20-inch box and doing a set of 10. A set of 10 on normal stairs versus 10 on a 20-inch box is massively different. So if you can reduce 2 reps here, 2 reps there, 3 reps there, and just make those less taxing, that's going to pay off. Like you're just saving yourself. I mean, I'll finish up my thought with this. Like think about how many reps you do in a typical workout, right? A typical lower body strength workout. You might do, I don't know, 10 to 15 total sets. I don't know, maybe more depending on what your goal of the session is. Think about how many, again, we're talking 10, 15, 20,000 steps, in a shift. You can easily reduce like 10 to 12 sets worth of exercises or movements just by, stepping a little bit smarter than you were. So you almost took out like a whole workout out of your day. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's like how my brain works when I'm out there hiking and I'm like, okay, I could take this big step or I could just do a small one, boom, I'm in the same place. And that was easy versus like, oh, this step is gonna, like, I got to really push off my leg. I got to brace my core. I got to put a lot of effort into this one step. Like, I don't know. When you're out there hiking, Justin, what do you think about your stride length, I guess?
So I'm on the same page. And the general principle that I think we're talking about here is mechanical advantage. So if I'm in a squat rack, I have a barbell on my back, and I'm going for a squat rep, and I have 300 pounds on the bar. If I'm going to do a quarter depth squat, I'm just going to hinge just slightly and come back up. I can do that all day. That is zero effort on my part. I can pretty much use that mechanical advantage and get through a good amount of 300-pound squat reps. But you ask me to go ass to grass, you get low, get parallel with the floor, I'm caving right now. Like, I haven't squatted in a bit. I'm done. That is a ridiculous amount of force that you have to produce, a ridiculous amount of torque that has to be produced at the level of our knee and our hip to get that bar back up. So if I take that same principle, you can kind of think of it like a doorway too. If you push on the outside of a door towards like the very end of the handle, way easy to open up that door. But if you push from the center of the door, immediately feels like more resistance, right? You have way more mechanical advantage when you're acting in those smaller ranges of motion and have way less flexion at the hip, at the knee, at the ankle. If you are taking larger steps and you're getting into deeper and deeper ranges of motion, for one, way more torque needs to be required, which requires way more force, which requires way more muscular output, which requires way more metabolic demands. Like, that's kind of the series that I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Like, that force has to come from energy production at some level, and the lesser amount of energy that I have to produce over 10, 20, 30,000 steps, money. That's staving off all the job. The job isn't to go hike, it's to go work. The job is, we're just getting to the work site. So if we're talking about strategies to stave off fatigue, smaller steps, greater mechanical advantage, and putting yourself in those greater positions to generate the torque required without putting your muscles at these really inefficient spots. Your muscles, when they're at those large ranges of motion, they're pulled apart so far that torque you got to create, it's massively harder. They function way less efficiently at those large ranges than they do when they're a little bit more in like an optimal mid-level, slightly shortened state. So that's the kind of the way that I'm thinking of like my steps, my activation, my force production while I'm hiking is just, man, if I take a large step here, that's like 2 to 3 times more energy cost. That's 2 to 3 times more torque I have to produce from my joints. Just overall, that's kind of the route that I'm thinking while I'm hiking.
Yeah. And like there are times where you have to step a certain way. Like the terrain is going to dictate what you have to do. I think just so we're clear, like we're talking about, just being more intentional with every single step that you're taking, right? Not just like blindly just following the person in front of you, like head down, or you're looking around and you're just suffering, but like still being intentional. And like this next one I want to talk about again is very detailed. A lot of people are going to be like, that doesn't even matter, but it's a concept of like staying linear with your steps and staying in the sagittal plane of motion, so not going side to side, not going diagonal. Because if you think about just your normal strength training exercises, right? You're much stronger in the sagittal plane. Okay, you can squat, lunge a lot more going forwards, backwards, or straight up and down. But if you start to go laterally, you start to go 45-degree angles, you lose a lot of that strength because your center of gravity is off. The stability demands are increased. So little things. So like even just if you have to kind of sidestep a little bit, like just turning your body so you're squared up to where you're about to step. Your shoulders, belly button, hips, knees, everything's in a line. You kind of just rotate, take a small step, rotate back, take a step, instead of kind of doing like a diagonal side thing. Again, it might seem really, really small, really insignificant, but those little things add up. So, just again, being intentional about kind of just your body angle, when you're stepping over obstacles, down trees or something, or you got to move around, you're going up and down rocks. I think the downhill side especially, is a role there. So to sum up that one is just stay linear, stay sagittal, stay forwards, backwards. Try not to go diagonal or too side to side on that one.
One word that I think might paint a further picture surrounding that is the concept of stiffness. I don't know if that like kind of comes in for you, Austin, but that's one way that whenever I'm doing any hiking tasks, I have to move my ankles, knees, and hips to propel myself forward. But any other movements that are not linear, I can try to control with the concept of stiffness, with these co-contractions where I'm just locking up. Like if you're about to do some kind of rotational task, you're usually not just free flowing, spine's moving whatever way it wants. You're locking in. You're bracing your core. You're making sure that pelvis, that spine, they're tight. You have a lot of pressure built up. You're doing whatever it is. Maybe you take a deep breath in, lock in the core. But that's another aspect of hiking that I think is super maybe underrated or not talked about as much, is that concept of just stiffness, at least at the level of our spine. Because if we're moving, swaying forward, back, side to side, again, just more shear forces, more damage, more metabolic costs. And as we sway, what do you think happens to the lower body? It's like we're the leaning tower of Pisa, where we have a 60-pound pack on our back and we sway just like a couple centimeters to the right. That's like immediate demand for more recruitment, more stability. So if we have the ability to concentrate on core stability, making sure that the hips and the spine are stacked, that in return is going to just decrease so much potential cost energy-wise on the pattern itself. But of course, if you've never been taught how to recruit and brace your core and have not necessarily stiff movement, but stiffening up certain parts of the body that don't have to move. I don't want people to think of the term stiffness and think rigid, awkward motion. I want it to be fluid where the joints are actually moving, but whatever doesn't need to be moving, let's lock that shit in place so we don't have to accommodate it.
Yeah, I call it dynamic stability. And if you do train, like if you train it in PT, it carries over so well to, um, especially in a load carriage scenario where, you got 40, 50, 60 pounds, you got a chainsaw on one side, whatever. Um, the last point that I had is my favorite one to talk about when it comes to biomechanics. So I think people don't talk about it enough, but it's this concept of push versus pull, which is basically like recruiting certain muscles. Because when most people, from me, just from my experience talking with other people and trying to help them with this concept, they know hiking is like all quads and calves, and it's because you're going uphill, and so you have to push yourself up. Every time you push up, you're getting to that knee extension. So that it's all quads, right? When you're just focused all on knee extension, and then, especially if you're wearing loggers, but even if you're not wearing loggers, but you're on something steep, like you kind of have that like your heel, it comes off the ground because you're just like pushing off the ball of your foot to get yourself up. All of that pushing is, like I said, it's all calves and it's all quads. And I think a lot of people, they're almost exclusively pushing themselves up the hill, and then their quads burn out and their calves burn out, and then they're just done. Where I've had so much success in my hiking performance is balancing push versus pull. So there are times where I'll be pushing myself up. I'm using my quads. I'm using my calves. I'm essentially propelling myself forward. But then, when I feel like like those muscles are starting to get fatigued, I'll switch to pulling myself up the mountain. So when I'm pulling, I'm now using my hamstrings and glutes to get myself up. So it's a lot easier to visually show this, but when I try to explain it verbally, I think about like imagine you take your step and it's like you're almost clawing the ground. So you grab the ground with your foot and then you almost like claw yourself, like almost like pull yourself back, and like that is what's going to propel the next step forward. So you claw, pull. And if you do it right, you will feel it in your hamstrings and glutes because they will start to blow up, which is good because you're giving your quads and calves a rest. Now, a lot of this is terrain dependent. Like there are some, especially when it gets to a point where it's so steep, like you have to push yourself up. Like you just can't pull in those situations. But that's something that's helped me so much and has helped a lot of people I've coached, is helping them understand push versus pull and helping them kind of translate, weight room exercises that we're doing, lunges versus like single leg RDLs. And like, hey, see, I want how you feel when you do those exercises is how I want you to feel on this hike. You're just switching back and forth from lunges to RDLs. And, once one gets tired, switch to the other one. And then, you won't blow yourself up as much. You kind of have that balance between the two.
Just to add another layer to the weight room movements, one way that you can probably hit whether or not you're doing a push or a pull, at least with the case of lower body movements, stick to that. If your shins are vertical and you're doing some kind of a squat pattern, some kind of a hinge pattern, it's probably going to be coming from the hip. Like if your shins stay vertical, where are you bending at? It's going to be at the hip complex. You're getting the glutes and the hamstrings way more involved at that point to produce that vertical movement. If those shins come forward, you're in some kind of knee extension. That torso is probably a little bit more vertical. So that's like that concept of vertical shins is kind of the way that you might be able to anticipate whether or not you're using glutes, hamstrings way more or making it more quad dominant. If in your lunge, that knee is driving over your toes, it's probably going to be a pretty quad dominant squat. If you can see your toes, you're probably hinging at the hip way more, and that's just one way for like a cue if you're trying to incorporate push versus pull with those patterns. Just pay attention to the shins. Just see where those are at.
Yep. And I can just to say the same thing in a different way, like just kind of paying attention to where your knees are relative to your toes. So like if you're wearing loggers, right? If your knees are over that big heel, you're probably more into that hinge. If those knees are going over your laces towards your toes, you're probably more into your quads. So you can kind of pay attention to your movement that way. But yeah, to summarize all of that is biomechanics and mechanical efficiency plays such a massive, massive role when it comes to hiking performance and reducing fatigue and just being able to go longer. Like that's how you improve your work capacity, right? Moving on to the last principle, and then I want to get to some more kind of practical stuff. The last principle of work capacity development is just building fatigue resistance. So I'm not gonna go too deep on this one, but when it comes to fatigue, there's two types of fatigues. There's global fatigue, which is like just cumulative, like your overall body is just tired, sore, beaten down kind of thing. And then there's local fatigue. So local fatigue is like more specific and targeted to a certain part of the body. So if you think about hiking in this context, hiking does have some global fatigue, or induces a lot of global fatigue, but it really induces a lot of local fatigue. Like I mentioned earlier, specifically with the quads, the calves, the your trunk from the load carriage, shoulders from the straps. So we know anyone who's done this job and who's hiked knows what gets really fatigued, right, from hiking. So what we can do is we can, write out what all of those parts of the body are that experience local fatigue, and then that's what we can attack in the weight room or with our strength training, with our work capacity training. So we can build fatigue resistance by, kind of hitting those specific areas in a more general sense. And I'll give you a couple examples. Again, I have a whole module that's free on this. If you go to, just check the link below. But one of my favorite all-time workouts, I do it a lot, is 400 body weight lunges for time. It's body weight, so there's really not a load, not a heavy load. There's still your body weight, so there is some resistance to it. But it's just 400 reps of no rest for your quads and your glutes. And the kind of the main objective behind this workout when I program it for people is like I want you to feel what it feels like to have a massive amount of local fatigue, and then I want you to just keep going and train through that. And it works because it's a safe movement. Like I said, we're taking the resistance out of it, and we're kind of going for just 12 to 15 minutes of your quads and glutes are not resting. So that's one of my favorite examples. There's a bunch of others, like I said, in some of the resources I've put together. But the key point there is global versus local fatigue. And we want to train that local fatigue resistance, which we can do through PT. It just doesn't have to be only through hiking.
One way that we can kind of, I'd like to illustrate that point just with some more examples. I like to think of global fatigue as your body kind of acts like an engine. There's a governor system at play within every engine. When that engine's working too much, and that doesn't necessarily need to be as a result of today's workout, that could be cumulative, as Austin said. That could be stress at home, that could be cognitive stress, that could be you've been just energy depleted, you could be lacking sleep. There's a lot of factors that can cause global fatigue, but that output is still, it's the governor system telling your body less output, this is too much for us right now, and it's going to restrict your capacity. So maybe you want to hike at a given speed, but the nervous system is fried. You're not going to be able to perform at that output. You can still drag yourself through that hiking effort, but if you're continually having these repeated bouts where your performance is being capped, where that governance system is turned on, that's probably a sign where maybe load management might be an issue. Or across the course of a season, if you're getting shitty sleep and still trying to get the same outcomes and you're not getting there, you might be in that state of global fatigue. That governor system principle is so fascinating to me, and I honestly think it's one of the more cool, biological preserved things, because think about, hundreds of thousands of years ago, this still existed. Humans' output was still limited in some capacity, and we had to be able to turn ourselves off. The best example is thermal strain. I love the work done by, what was it? Who was the researcher? It was Jose Alonso, and he looked at a lot of trained and untrained cyclists during work capacity tests, essentially, on an ergometer. And the one variable that determined whether folks quit, or when they quit, I should say, was temperature. It was core temperature inside. So if you are producing so much energy that has so much byproducts of heat that you are just internally getting fried right now, that governor system's going to turn on. And what they found in their studies was at around 40 degrees, 40.5 degrees, everybody quit. whether you were trained, untrained, whether you went for 150 minutes or 30 minutes, whether you were at any given level of exertion, it happened at that 40.5 degrees Celsius internal body temp. So I think that's like a really interesting one to bring to the global fatigue concept. It's your governor system telling you, cut this shit out, dude. Like, this is like, we need to think about survival right now. But hand in hand with that, there's obviously ways you can increase and become more adaptable so your nervous system doesn't get to that level. But what Austin talked about with local fatigue, that's at the level of muscle. The byproducts happening within muscular fatigue are causing that, man, my quads are blown. Global fatigue is whole body, nervous system's not going to do it anymore. It's had enough.
Yeah. And that's why, I mean, we do this with our one-on-one clients. Like, this is why we program the way that we do, because it's to build, like, we're very intentional about building fatigue resistance, both against global fatigue, through load management and through periodization, and local fatigue through the work capacity development sessions that we program. So I know some of this stuff can seem overwhelming just hearing it, but there's a lot of intentionality that goes into programming to help combat these things, because y'all know this is important. You just mentioned core temperature. Think about the job that we do and like talk about high core temperatures, just doing the basics of the job, of the occupation.
Totally.
So
it gives you the full circle picture of how important the holistic side is with global fatigue. Because if you're just a specimen physically, but you're not hydrating properly, once you hit that 40 degrees, you're done anyways. If you could have built up the most robust systems to perform that output, but if you just don't take care of yourself on the line, if you're not getting the sleep, if you're not getting the hydration, if you're not getting the adequate nutrients to supply the activities, you're still fucked. Like, you're done. Those things will bottleneck you faster than any performance adaptation ever will. And that's like the name of the game, endurance sports. It's all the things you do during the race and around the race to set you up for success.
yeah, I love this topic of work capacity. I think it's so interesting because of all of the factors like we've been talking about, and there's other factors too that we really haven't even dove into. But it's why I love like this episode. I love to nerd out about this stuff, which is why I want to go into one of my favorite all-time studies by Joe Soul, titled "The Metabolic Demands of Hiking and Wildland Firefighting." It's from 2018, and if you don't know who Joe Soul is, he's a buddy of rugged athletes. He's exercise physiologist with the Forest Service, based out of Missoula. And just to give some kind of an overview of the study that he did, he basically just tracked the demands of all different types of hiking. So some of it was training hikes, some of it was hiking both ingress and egress on incidents, so like on an actual fire assignment, and just kind of compiled a ton of data and said, okay, what are the metabolic demands of it? And so I want to just kind of throw out some of the things that were interesting to me, going through this study, and it'll be kind of, I think, a good segue just into what you're going to touch on next, Justin, of just kind of more, I guess, practical application into all of this. So hopefully this helps just kind of put some numbers to like, oh yeah, that's what I feel when I'm out there suffering through hiking. But a couple interesting notes from this study. One is that 60% of all hiking performed in the study was on a positive grade, which I think is interesting because it feels like it's more than that. It feels like you're always going up a positive grade. So, I mean, it is a majority of the time, 60%, but it's just interesting. For me, I was like, man, it feels like that's like 90%, but maybe that's just in my head.
I walked uphill both ways to school.
Yeah, like you got to ingress and egress is up. I will say, it's really rare, but I don't know if you've ever had to go down to get to where you're going, and then like you have to hike up to get back. Like that's the
It's a
worst.
rough morning.
That is the worst. That was my first ever fire. Was That was the situation. We had to park at the very top of this ridge, hike down, and then we went uphill line construction basically all morning, and it was a nightmare. I was like dying, and we haven't even got to where we're plugging in yet. And then we had to hiking out was the worst part of my life. But a couple other interesting things before I just don't want to make fun of myself too much. I thought this was really interesting. So IHCs spent 75% of the duration of training hikes at an intensity above ventilatory threshold. So for just context, and they made this point in the article too, well-trained endurance athletes have shown success with up to 80% of their training time at intensities below the ventilatory threshold, despite competing at much higher intensities. And I want to say they made this point in the article, but the point is, you know, if you're on a type 1 crew, you're going to be training hard. That's how training is. And everyone that's been on a type 1 crew and a lot of other crews as well know that to be true. That's kind of common sense. But I just thought that was an interesting point. Like 75% of the time on a training hike, you're getting after it. So no zone 2 training hikes.
More like 100%.
Yeah, zone 2 training hikes aren't really a thing, which is actually, I could probably get on a big tangent here, but I'm not going to. It is why I reserve like hiking in a PT sense for lower volumes, because the more time we spend at these moderate to high intensities during hiking, hiking for PT, that's just less time that we are able to spend building our aerobic capacity and focused on, well, it's more stressful, it's more taxing. So it's could potentially be taking away from other things that we should be prioritizing in our PT, aerobic capacity or strength, power, muscular endurance. Because if that's what you're doing every day, and you're basically at like zone 3, zone 4, zone 5 all the time, you're just not leaving room for much else. What else is on here? There's a lot of interesting stuff. Let's get on to some oxygen consumption numbers. I thought some of these were interesting. So to put it into context, the PAC test has an estimated oxygen consumption of 22.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. So keep that number in mind, 22.5. 42% of all ingress hikes in the study occurred at an intensity level that exceeded the arduous PAC test. Up to 41 during uphill hiking. That's nearly double the oxygen consumption of the PAC test. Right away, it's like
to what the test tells you is that you have at least a 45 milliliter per kilogram per minute oxygen consumption capacity. That's your VO2 max estimate if you can do the PAC hike test. So
yeah,
what was it? 41% of the
41,
time, or 40 the
41 during uphill hiking.
Yeah, that was the max that they got to, or that was the average.
That was the max. The mean, it doesn't have the mean on here, but it looks like, I'm looking at a chart, it looks like it was around 26 or 27. Again, a lot of these are means, or, we'll have to maybe show a visual. It's hard to explain this, because they've got the means, and then like the peak and the bottom.
Yeah. So essentially, they're performing at a potential cap. What the PAC hike tells us is that you're getting to at least a 45 max VO2, and some of these hikes were performed at your max. So it's essentially like you're redlining.
Yeah, and that's uphill. Ingress hiking was up to 35, so a little bit less. What I thought was interesting when I'm looking at this chart, the the discrepancy between like the highest oxygen consumption demands and the lowest is it's pretty big. There's a wide gap, and you keep in mind, when they're collecting this data, they're collecting it like for long time durations. A lot of this is like throughout entire shifts. So you're you are seeing that's why the means are lower. At least that's how I'm interpreting the data. Like the means are lower, which from everything I've read about the pack test, like how it was developed and how they came to, these are the numbers, the minimum like VO2 max that we think we need to be on the fire line. They used mean, which it makes a lot of sense, but at the same time, when you do look at these peak numbers and the fact that they are in some instances almost double, that's why I look at the pack test and I'm like, for a bare minimum it's good, but for the highest demands that we face, it's nowhere close, and the data is pretty clear on that. So I just think it's interesting that it's such a wide discrepancy between like redlining and suffering versus you can be kind of chilling at a low intensity for a while, and it averages out when you look at the mean. But the hard stuff is hard. Oh, this is I didn't have this in my notes, but I just found this from a different study. This is from Brent Ruby's comprehension study, which I thought this was really interesting. And I use this. I'm not gonna lie. I use this as ammunition against the people that come into my comments and say you should hike every day. But in Brent Ruby's study that he did years ago, he found that hiking consumed 19% of the total time that firefighters were engaged in high intensity tasks. So when he was talking about high intensity tasks, that's hiking, cutting, swamping, digging line. So basically your direct fire suppression and hiking. If you like really think about that, hiking was only 19% of the time spent doing high intensity stuff. Yet, when we look at, or you still have, all these people out there that are like, yeah, we have to hike every day or hike every other day. Even though hiking is a lot, still only 19% when you look at all of the high intensity fire line tasks that are done. So like, to me, that stands out. That number stands out as, hiking plays a smaller role than I think we give it credit to sometimes.
I would agree. And like we had mentioned previously, the purpose of hiking is to get to the job site. And in my eyes, the goal is to get to the job site recovered. So if we're operating at an energy output level, which Austin alluded to, can get super high. Obviously, there's a lot of extremes in between, but anyone who's done wildland on any type of hand crew, that some hikes are going to suck, and some are going to be in the heat, super heavy loads. Maybe you have to like carry in all your water with you. You got to bring in additional things, like you got to carry a jerry. There's been fires where I've had to have a 100-pound system on my back. So it's not about just training for the pack hike test to make sure you hit that 22.5 output level. You've got to be prepared to get to the job site when the demands are at that 41, at 50. So if you're redlining during the pack hike test, what's going to happen when you're at the 41? So I think that's just like the bigger picture of the demands are going to change every single day. You need to be ensuring your ability to have the capacity to make sure you're not redlining that whole hike, so that now you're just a liability once you get to the job site. Now it's just triage and making sure you don't like pass out or have a HRI during the day. So I think that's like another thing that just these studies paint to me, is that we can't just operate off of the minimum baseline level of readiness. We want our capacity to be as high as humanly possible, so that once that hike is done, we can recover. That's the goal. Like if you can hike and recover so that your heart rate comes back down, you can start to operate at a good tempo, that's money. If you're still huffing and puffing, if your like temperature's just getting towards that like upper end of what it can reach, if you're hitting that like governor systems are failing, what's the purpose of the next 16 hours for you? So I think that's the picture that I get painted of like, dude, these baseline measurements are simply just never going to be enough for the extremes that the job requires of you.
Yeah. I always say this, like your hike is just your commute to your job. Like once you're done with your hike, then you have to actually clock in, rip cord and actually start working. So
Which is 80% of the high intensity work you're doing that day.
yeah, like you've only done a fifth of it. You've got the vast majority of it still in front of you. So I think that's a good transition to go into your stuff about the practical application. But there is, I think, one thing we can talk about first, just to kind of help, uh, just help with kind of the efficiency stuff we were talking about, but also just helping you get to, you finished hiking and you're somewhat recovered, you're good to go, and that's just like the skill of pacing and the skill of utilizing your breath properly and your respiratory system and like not taxing that out too much. So I want to hear your thoughts on this, but I'll just kind of share what I tell people when I'm coaching people through this. And it's well, I use the visual of a gas tank, right? Like you got to know like how much gas is in your gas tank, and you kind of have to know if you're burning through gas fast and you're about to go on E, or if you're good and maybe you can hit the gas pedal a little bit and push it, or like I said, maybe you're burning through fuel really fast and you gotta pump the brakes a little bit and slow down. So obviously if you're hiking in, right, you gotta stay with the crew and you gotta just be with the person or stay right behind the person in front of you. So your pace might not necessarily be up to you. Most of the times it's not. But shouldn't change the fact that like you should be thinking about your gas tank and having a level of self-awareness of where your gas tank is. And that way, when it is time to start running your saw or hop in, start digging, you can kind of learn, like I said, how to pace, when to hit the gas pedal, when to hit the brake pedal, when to put on cruise control a little bit, and just kind of understanding the entire situation of what your crew is assigned to do and how long it might go, knowing there's a good chance it might go longer than you think, and just playing your gas tank based off of that. So when it comes to pacing, that's kind of how I see it. And then when it comes to breathing, I think the biggest thing that I help people with is just like helping people understand, like, control your breathing and try to get into a rhythm with your breathing before you get tired. Because once you're tired and you hit that fatigue point, like you can't really go back unless you just stop. But you can't stop. Like you're working. You got stuff to do. So before you even feel like your breathing rate is increasing, your heart rate is increasing, try to get into a rhythm. Time it with your steps. So like have a cadence with your steps, a cadence with your breathing. It's going to depend on how fast you're going, but every 2 steps inhale, every 2 steps exhale, something like that. And it can obviously change depending on the situation. But get into a cadence, get into a rhythm early, and that's going to help you kind of push back that panic breathing and just out of control, like your lungs are just burning. It might not get rid of that, but it'll delay it a little bit. So those are kind of my 2 big things when I'm teaching people about pacing, coaching people through it, is your gas tank, and then breathing just early and often. Try to control it, get into a rhythm. You have anything to add on the kind of the pacing side or the breathing side?
I'm pretty stoked on this. I've got some things. So first thing, away from the pacing, it blows my mind that this field is so just like get after it as soon as you start the hike, like balls to the wall right out of the gate. Like I don't know if it's obviously some part of like cultural like tradition when it comes to hotshot crews. You should be hiking at a pace that is formidable, and when other people see you, you're getting after it. But when I look at that from a physiological standpoint, it's probably like the worst thing in terms of creating a deficit for you right out of the gates. That concept is oxygen deficit. When we're going from standing at rest to immediately going to a pace that is like up on the upper echelon of our demands, if we're just hiking on steep terrain, maybe it's already hot, your heart rate's already just getting blasted right from the start of your hike. If you didn't do a warm up, if you didn't get the heart rate up, if you didn't get your breath rate up, if you didn't get your core temp up, your body's not firing on all cylinders, if I can put it in simple terms. The purpose of a warm up is to prep the systems to be working and already functioning at a good level. Because when we're at rest, that's simply just not happening. When we're producing energy at a really high rate, there's a lot of enzymes that need to be working. When we get into those aerobic systems, it takes a bit. So if we're going from 0 to 100, there's a big gap between where the demands are and what our output is. And that, at the end of your hike, you're going to feel it. That 30 minutes into your shift, you're going to feel it. So I think that's one concept that I would love to kind of touch on, of just that easy. I mean, not saying that this happens every single time, but if you're going from briefing right to like hammering out your high intensity hike without doing any warm up, and I understand the job is the job, you're going to get after it when you have to get after it, but when applicable, get a warm up in. Do some lunges, do some squats, do some movement, and then strategically, if possible, start your hikes slow and finish them faster. That is like baseline concept that every single sport performance type of scenario should abide by, of having that gradual incremental increase. If you just went to the track and you went from your car to running a 400-meter dash, what do you think that's going to look like over the course of, like, if you have to do 20 of those, not going to look as good as if you did maybe a 400 meter at 50% of your max, then 60% of your max, then 70, and then all the way built up to 100%. So that one, in terms of pacing, staving off fatigue, setting yourself up for success, warm up.
Yeah, I want to kind of go off of what you're saying, because it was firing me up. I want to make sure people don't hear us say pace and just automatically associate slow with that. Because pacing is not about going slow. It's about getting to the finish line faster. So if you think about, like, I coach people on the mile and a half all the time. And I've done the mile and a half myself more times than I can count. I've done the 2 mile in the Army more times than I can count. Timed rucks in the Army more times than I can count. Every single time this happens, a bunch of people come out the gate super, super fast. And then I come out the gate at a more of a paced, slower, just more strategic kind of speed. And then we get halfway through, and then I'm just passing people one by one. I'm just picking them off because they came out the gate hot. They blew through their gas tank. Now they're running on fumes, and they're crossing the finish line just sputtering across. Whereas, like, I was very intentional with my pace coming out. And just with everything, try to have negative splits. The second half should be faster than the first half. That's for every run, every hike, every ruck, whatever. Like if you do that, you will get to the finish line faster. That's just straight up. And yeah, you're starting off slower, and it can be a learning curve of like how to, for some hard chargers, like to actually do that and feel good about doing that. But I just want to make sure people listening aren't like, oh, they're telling us to go slow, not listening to what they're saying. It's like, no, we're saying be smart about it, be intentional, so that you finish faster. So at the end of the day, you're faster. You're not slower. So, man, you got me fired up because I love talking about the skill of pacing. I do think it's a critical skill that absolutely absolutely helps. And I keep thinking about stuff, and I'm gonna keep going.
It
Um,
100% is
what-
a skill. Like you cannot just hear something on a podcast and go implement it. I am going to go on a trail run today. I have a set kind of gear, a set zone I want to work at, a set breathing cadence that I want to work at. But as soon as you hit a hill, it's like what Mike Tyson's quote, like you have a plan so you get punched in the mouth. And that's what pacing is like fun for me, because even as a person who's coaching myself and going out and doing it, I'm just punching myself in the mouth. Pacing is fucking hard. That is something that is the hardest part of trail running for me, is just sticking to a breath cadence and keeping that under control. But it's like mindfulness to me, man. That is captivating the whole trail run, to try and keep myself operating as efficiently as possible, which I'll let you go, Austin, but that's kind of leading into my next point of utilizing the breath as a means of pacing has been the most powerful performance enhancing tool for me as far as endurance performance. But I'll get into that in a second.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I was just gonna say, like, I have such a great example of this from my personal time on a hand crew, and it's from just me being very intentional and developing this skill during PT. Like, think about PT as like the practice. Like, that's where you're getting those reps in so that you can use that skill during the game or during, when you're clocked in and you're working. And I had multiple people on my last crew, my saw partner, and then some of the other swampers on the other saw teams. So they said the same thing to me, you know, independent from each other. They're like, I've noticed you don't really go like you don't go all out. Like you're not like the fastest swamper. You're not going crazy, but you also never stop. You literally don't stop. And there's times where they're having to like take a second and kind of recover, and I'm still just going at this constant steady pace. And it's because I've practiced this. Like, it's a skill that I've developed. I know my threshold pace, and I know kind of where I can, kind of the fastest speed that I can go, but go for a long time. And I know if I'm in a situation where I can go a little bit harder, I can hit the gas pedal, and I know when I need to hit the brakes a little bit. And I'm kind of constantly playing that game of gas versus brakes and paying attention to my gas tank, like I mentioned earlier. And I develop it during PT. Like, I do it during runs, during work capacity sessions that I do. And then, I use that skill when it matters the most.
Absolutely. I think the breath is a great tool for forming that relationship. So that's what I'll get into now, because I think a lot of individuals with endurance performance, the job, their training, I get asked a lot of questions between nasal breathing, mouth breathing, and I'd like to just clarify some points of like truths, myths, and then actionable strategies to leverage the breath for your pacing. So first off, one is not better than the other in terms of output. I don't want you to think of it as more efficient, less efficient. I want you to think of it as a natural process of just getting CO2 out. Whatever the hell needs to happen to get CO2 out is what you're going to breathe like. So if we're at rest, you can nose breathe just fine, right? You can breathe maybe 6 breaths a minute if you really concentrated on it. That need to get CO2 out is so low because we're not producing that much energy. If we're just sitting at rest, there's not a lot of CO2 to expel. So in that case, I would advocate for nose breathing. Why? There's 2 to 3 times more resistance in that airflow through the nose than there is through the mouth. So it's a lot harder. You require a lot more force to get that air in. And it, because of that, maybe facilitates the diaphragm to get involved. We start doing the belly breathing, which that's really the byproduct of nose breathing that I want you to pay attention to. It's intentional. If we mouth breathe, you can do that subconsciously all day. Quick in, quick out, doesn't matter. If we're nose breathing, there's intention behind it. You're having to produce force to get that air to suck in, create that positive pressure in, and the diaphragm is getting involved. And that diaphragm action is what's getting the parasympathetic nervous system to fire up. So that's the key distinction. It's not necessarily the nose breathing itself, it's the diaphragm movement itself innervating that vagus nerve, slowing the heart rate. slowing the breath rate, getting the fight or flight response to go down. So let's take that into practicality with the sake of hiking.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're hiking at ventilatory threshold. It's not going to serve you well to nose breathe, right? The CO2 demand is really high right now. We're producing so much more energy than we did at rest, and if we're trying to nose breathe and restrict that airflow in and restrict the airflow out, that's just excess fatigue. That's going to continually burn us out. I'm not telling you to choose a breath pattern that's against what you need to expel the byproducts that you need to. There's no problem with mouth breathing. I would say the rate is what I'd get after. Like if you are nose breathing in, mouth breathing out, if you're mouth breathing in, mouth breathing out, if you're just not huffing and puffing like a dog, awesome. If you have intentionality behind it and you have some kind of cadence built within it and you're trying to make sure that you're not just expending extra energy or just not even being mindful about it at all, creating that strain already just by huffing and puffing at 40 beats or 40 rate per minute versus maybe we can dial that back down to 10 or 20. Money.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I don't necessarily want you to think of it just as like hiking in the act itself. Think about the recovery piece. Maybe you got to like that red line state during your hike, heart rate went up to 90% of your capacity for like 5 or 10 minutes. That's fine. It's going to happen. But what do you do after that? If you just get to the end of your hike and you plop down, sit on your ass, and just start continually breathing in that same way, no diaphragm action, in through the mouth, out through the mouth, you're missing such a key physiological advantage of being able to nose breathe, slow down the breath, initiate the diaphragm, get the heart rate down. The amount of times I see graded exercise tests where like the goal at the end of the exercise test is go from max heart rate back down to resting, and
Yep.
it just doesn't happen. Blood pressures stay high, heart rate stays way high, and I just look at them. I'm just like, you're not trying to recover. Like, do you know how to recover? And that key piece of simply the breath. Like, obviously, maybe a little bit's cognitive. If you're just stuck in that state where maybe your just brain's going a mile a minute, that could play into it. But I think the breath is probably like bang for your buck, best tool to get that recovery initiated, get the heart rate back down, not to baseline most likely, but at a level where you're just not like max out stress, so that when you get to your shift, when you get to the cutting, the prepping, the digging, whatever you're going to do, you're not operating already at that sky high level. So that's the key point I'd like to make. I don't care if you nose breathe, I don't care if you mouth breathe during your hike. Choose a ventilatory strategy that gets the CO2 out you need to, but just have a mindfulness about it. Honestly, like during hikes, that's like the greatest opportunity to have a good part of your day. Cutting's gonna suck. Prepping's gonna suck. Like maybe that's just me. Like digging's gonna suck. I love hiking. We hike for fun. And I don't know,
Yeah.
I enjoy the hike, and I just get to focus on the breath, look at the scenery around me. If you have one part of the day you can enjoy, I think it's the hike, to be honest, in my opinion. Every other part of the operations is going to suck at some point, but that's my piece. I think the breath, it's an opportunity to bring mindfulness to your day.
Yeah. I love that. Um, I think we did a good job covering all that. I want to move on to these 11 principles that you put out there because I really like these. And we kind of talked about some of these already. But what I'm thinking for this part is I'm just going to go through one by one. I'm going to read your principle, and then I want you to just give like a 30 to 60-second answer of like, this is what this is. This is how you apply this. And then we'll kind of just go through some, if we've already kind of covered it, we can just kind of skip over. But yeah, be cool. We just go one by one. I'll just answer it. I'll say it, and you just kind of give me your thoughts.
I'll do my best.
If I have thoughts too, I'll throw them in there. But um, again, for these are just principles on when it comes to applying all of this stuff. Um, Number one, injury risk increases when load is introduced too quickly.
When we have to think about adaptation, we can't just assume that every part of our body is adapting at the same rate. Our muscles adapt very quickly to demands, but our tendons, our ligaments, our bones, our cartilage, all those tissues take time. So if you're going in to your season, just I'll put on the pack when it gets there. I'll start going on downhill hikes when it's time. The tendons are not going to meet those demands as quick as the muscles. So we need to start introducing those forces, those demands, those different types of postures and requirements early, because those tissues take weeks, months versus a matter of days, weeks in the scope of muscle versus those secondary tissues. And that's how micro traumas happen, and those lead to stress fractures, and those lead to long-term injuries. Give yourself time to build up to the demands that you need with respect to hiking.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better. Yeah, kind of blows up the whole all PT in March comments that I get on my posts. All right, number 2, higher relative load equals greater physiological strain and injury risk.
If you're a small wildland firefighter, you have extra concern. That is a 45-pound pack to a 200-pound person versus a 45-pound pack to a 150-pound person. Greater increases of mechanical strain result in injury risk, fatigue. So you got to hammer these things out, abide by these principles, start training those loads early and often so that you don't have to start with a 45-pound pack on your back. Start with 20, 25, 30. I'm not capping any you could be 100 pounds. I've seen 110-pound chicks carry 200-pound systems on their back. Doesn't matter who you are, but you have to prepare yourself for those demands adequately so that those stresses don't multiply and happen too fast and result in injury.
Yep. And I'll even tie it back into that first one, right? When you talk about increasing load too much or too much too soon. Yeah, if those relative loads are even higher for you, that's just that much longer you need to train up to handle that. So you have to start earlier than other people because you need that volume to build up. All right, I love that. Number 3, stronger tissues equal better force tolerance.
Same argument I'd make for why you should get your VO2 max as high as possible, because any work rate you do lower than that is now relatively reduced. That is way less strain. In the same way that hiking is a forceful activity. We are producing force, we are absorbing force. If you build up tissues, our glutes, our hamstrings, our quads, our calves, our trunk, if we have stronger tissues to be able to absorb and create those forces, that yields way less metabolic cost, way less energy production. We can become way more economic movers. We want to get the muscles to do work for us instead of against us. So having that increased capacity for strength is going to do you so well in terms of economy of effort for hiking.
Yep. I'll just add to that. I think people, for the most part, massively underestimate how much strength goes into hiking performance. And if you increase your max strength, your max deadlift, squat, lunge, whatever, you will hike better. Like literally, like we're talking 2-3 rep maxes. That stuff will help because everything else becomes more sub-max. Which kind of goes into this next one. Most load carriage is submaximal but prolonged.
Ties into the work capacity argument. We can't just train for a 20-minute hike that's max effort. We should be training with the mindset that this is going to happen under suboptimal conditions for extended periods of time, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. Train with fatigue. You shouldn't be training just when you feel optimal. Maybe your hardest part of the day, sometimes during those training efforts, should be at the end, when you've already blown out those systems, when you've already done max strength training, when you've already done all your work. Then you do some kind of long, based hike, long load carriage tasks, those 400-meter lunges. Training those systems to operate under fatigue, completely different physiological context than training when you just show up to the gym first. So train for those shitty contexts rather than the optimal ones.
Yeah. We call it periodized suck. And we're going to have a whole episodes dedicated to that coming. You already know. All right. We already kind of talked about this one. Wait, am I reading the right one? Yeah. Load carriage is a learned skill. Alters gait, posture, coordination. Is there anything else you want to add to that we haven't covered?
Fun quote I like to live by is, your cells don't have eyes. Our cells only see demands through inputs like force. Like in the case of hiking, it doesn't know we're hiking. It just sees that we're stepping on the ground producing or absorbing some force, and we're accommodating that to locomote again. So when we take load carriage, when we add a 60-pound pack to our back, when we go on awkward terrains, when we have a saw, an asymmetrical load on our shoulder, those are all new motor skills that we're adding to the nervous system. We're altering our posture to accommodate the load. We're altering our stability components. Our proprioceptive systems, our balancing systems have to get adapted. These are all skills. I don't want you to think all hiking is the exact same. And if you're going to keep adding layers, don't just expect, oh, I'm going on hikes with my girlfriend or boyfriend in the off season, and expect to be able to translate that to all these new demands as they keep getting involved throughout the season. You have to train each one of them specifically, introduce them early, introduce them often. It's a skill. It's not just an activity.
Yeah, well said. All right, next one. Injury risk is strongly tied to total exposure.
Like Austin said, you don't need just to hike all off season to get good at hiking. We hike all season. I'm very strategic, and Austin's very strategic about implementing hiking in our off season training because of this principle. If we are constantly having a 60-pound pack on our back, constantly going on uphills, those imbalances that we acquire are never getting corrected. Those shear forces, those rotational forces, those suboptimal circumstances are great to introduce in little micro elements as the season gets closer, but I'm not going anywhere near a pack in November, in December, in January. I'm taking a strategic pause so that my tissues can actually get a break from those demands, because it's damage. Hiking with a load is damage, and we have to understand that, and It needs to be strategically thought of as that. It's not something that we were naturally designed to do in our skeletal structure. It's not like terrains that we're always going to be optimal and working on. Take a pause. Decrease the cumulative fatigue.
No, I love that. We talk a lot about like acute to chronic workload, and especially we've kind of already talked about this on a couple of these points, but like what we see a lot is people having these massive acute spikes in workload, and that's a problem because they didn't have that chronic workload beforehand to be able to handle that acute spike. Like acute spikes are going to happen with life. Sometimes it's uncontrollable, but sometimes it's just a lack of preparation, and then we're just get hit with this high volume all of a sudden, and then wonder why our body starts to break down because we didn't have that total exposure and that foundation that was built. Last thing on this, and we'll move on to the next one. But I heard the same thing from a lot of people that we worked with this off season. Is they going through the first couple training phases back in like October, November, maybe even going into December. They're like, I feel like I'm not doing enough of this or enough of that. And I had to say the same thing. And these are all pretty hard charging people, high fitness levels, wondering why we're not doing XYZ or it's not hard enough. And I have to say, like, I just trust the process. We're getting there, but it's November. Like, we don't need to be ready for criticals in November. We need to build up to that. And then sure enough, fast forward 3-4 months, setting barbell PRs left and right, setting 1.5 mile PRs left and right, like taking that 2 to 3 month phase, maybe even 4 months for some people, of just scaling back and just building a stronger foundation, a bigger foundation. Man, for people that haven't done that, it's a game changer. Because like we're just increasing the ceiling and their capacity to do more by almost taking a step back to take a step forward. So we can do a whole episode on that too.
Let's do 7 and 8 together.
Yeah. We kind of already talked about this during the biomechanical part, but poor load distribution increases stress, closer to center of mass, left to right, forward, back. What do you got for that one?
I'll couple that with the next one, which is build core stability. If we're talking about decreasing mechanical strain, if we have a pack on our back and we're leaning forward, leaning too far back, swaying right, swaying left, if we're awkward in our transitions between movements, that's added strain on our spine every single rep over the course of a long season. Those micro injuries lead to bigger injuries. That's how you get like hip pain, back pain, knee pain. If we can, like we said, build that stability, build that base, teach our pelvis, teach our trunk how to stay stable when we're doing awkward loads. That's why we introduce them in the gym where we can train it and we have control over it. Big emphasis in my training, unilateral loads, asymmetrical loads. I'm trying to make sure you carry things awkwardly, making sure that you're moving, hinging, squatting with that uneven distribution of that weight. But we're doing it where we can actually focus in and make sure what's moving is doing it in a linear fashion and what's not moving is staying not moving. That's that dynamic stability portion that Austin and I talked about earlier. Being able to move with purpose instead of just moving and swaying and letting the flow happen naturally. We can control that and it staves off that mechanical strain, reduces injury risk.
Yep. Just we talked about a lot earlier. Yeah, that efficiency piece is so critical. Next one, improving aerobic capacity decreases relative intensity work and helps to stave off fatigue. What do you got for that one?
So the three things that are going to increase metabolic or energy costs of hiking: speed, terrain, and load. Forgot that last one. Biggest part, honestly, load's going to be the heaviest of those three and the heavy hitters. But you have to understand that that mechanical strain on the body results in physiological demands. That output is going to continually increase that intensity. And in order to make sure that that intensity doesn't supersede those high energy systems where we are limited for like 5 minutes of activity, 10 minutes of activity. If I told you to go out and do the 1.5 mile run as fast as you could, and I told you you have to do that for 45 more minutes, it's just not going to happen. We want to increase the capacity of where we can go in those lower energy systems, those aerobic systems, because those can go on for way longer. So if we have an aerobic base that is so wide that we can handle high intensity activities in those bases, we're just going to be able to go for that much longer during our shift. We're going to be able to recover so much faster. We want to stay aerobic with our hiking. So that's the goal. If your VO2 max is so low that your hiking gets you into that 80, 90, 100% range, good luck lasting for as long as that hike might be for the day. You have to be prepared for 2-hour hikes, not 20-minute hikes. So we need to be able to have that aerobic base to accommodate those mechanical and energetic demands.
Yeah, I'm gonna steal this and keep going because I talk about this a lot when I talk about work capacity development, and I like to highlight the fact that I think a lot of people forgot about this from high school biology or physics if they ever took physics, but like work is quantifiable. Like we know how to calculate work, and we measure it in joules, and the equation for work is force times displacement. And if you break it down even further, like we know what force is, or we know how to calculate force. It's mass times acceleration. So when it comes to calculating work, it's basically mass times acceleration times displacement, which is measured in meters. So those are you just touched on it, but those are the three components of work. It's mass, load, acceleration or speed, and then distance traveled. So I use this formula, or I kind of use this formula in a way to program for work capacity. And so, when I'm coming up with like a Metcon, or, when I'm progressing my hiking, week over week, and I'm not just doing the same hike every single time, those are the variables I'm tweaking. And am I trying to increase the force or the mass part of this? So am I really focusing on load and strength? Or am I focusing on acceleration, maybe taking away some of that load and trying to push for faster paces, or distance? Am I just going for longer time domains, longer distances? Like those are the three aspects of work that I like to tweak in programming. And some of it's just to make sure I'm hitting all three of those and kind of emphasizing all three. Some of it's dependent on the individual. Like, do they really need to improve on the strength side of things? Because that's what's crushing them, and that's where their fatigue is hitting them early and often. Or is it the speed part? They get ramped up and like kind of weird, like where we were talking about earlier. Their breathing rate gets out of control right away. Their heart rate gets out of control, and they just they have to slow down. Like they've hit their threshold straight out the gate. Or is it just volume? Is it just displacement? Is it just like they don't have the tissue tolerance to go farther with the same load and the same speed kind of remaining as a constant? So I love looking at work capacity from literally like a physics standpoint, because we know what work is and we can calculate it, and we can look at what makes up that equation, and that we can develop it by designing programs around, or designing specific workouts and hiking around that. So that was awesome. I love talking about that. I also love this next one, training eccentric strength. Go into that.
The downhill, the descent, that is the primary driver of mechanical strain during hiking, of injury during hiking. Everybody intuitively knows that. Like Austin alluded to, you start a shift off, you're not warmed up, done no movement prep, and you just start hiking downhill on some steep shit, your joints are going to feel it. So if we take that principle, acknowledge that during downhill hiking, we're going to be at the highest risk of injury, the highest degradation on the tendons, bones, ligaments, joints. We can take that into the off season, take that into our training, and prepare for it with eccentric training. Training our muscles to recruit while we're lengthening, while we're doing step downs, while we're doing slow, lowering controlled lifts. So we can train the muscles to better recruit, become more efficient at recruiting, and have a greater capacity to recruit while we're doing those braking activities. And if we don't do that, I think of it as you're either going to use your muscles or everything else. And you're going to absorb that force one way or another. You step down, maybe it's off like a ledge, 2 feet drop. If you don't recruit it with your muscles, that's 2 to 3, 4 times your body weight going right to the joint. And that over time makes sense why wildland firefighters have such chronic injuries. And obviously that has to do with a bunch of things, but I would be willing to make the argument that the downhill hiking, if mindless and without intention is happening, that's increasing cumulative stress on the joint over and over and over every single day. So one task I can ask you to do to know if you have eccentric strength that I like incorporating into programs is a single leg step down. Step onto a box, 12, 16, 20, 24 inches high, I don't care. Try to have one foot down on the box, lower down with the other foot, barely tap it on the ground. I don't want you to move the weight off this top leg, just barely tap, come back up, slow and controlled. If you can't do that without compensating, without that top leg's knee caving in, without your body swaying or shifting on the upper body half, if you can't do that with coordination, well, how the hell are you going to do it on awkward terrain, with boots on, with a load on your back, when you're fatigued? Like, if you can't do a step down in a controlled setting, I'm only imagining the strain happening during the work shift as you start downhill hiking.
Yeah, this is such an undervalued aspect of physical training, because historically, wildland firefighter PT has been running, hiking, and calisthenics. That's it. One thing that we are doing that I think is blowing some people's minds because they haven't ever done it before is we're introducing tempo and eccentric emphasized movements into their program. You just gave some great examples on the strength side. We do a lot of like unilateral strength training tempo. So like think like Bulgarian split squats, reverse lunges. We add isometrics in there. So we're adding, time under tension at end range of motion, essentially. Our muscles are fully lengthened. And that's just helping build that strength for those downhill hiking. And then the other thing that one of my favorite topics to talk about is plyometrics for this. Because I think a lot of people think about eccentrics as slow, but eccentrics is just muscle lengthening. It's just the deceleration portion, essentially. So when we do plyometrics, we're adding velocity to that movement, which is just adding a whole nother layer of stress that's helping us build not only strength, but power and coordination in kind of that eccentric, and just transitioning from eccentric, like deceleration, into acceleration. And so we do plyos with almost everybody. And a lot of it's, I would say most of it's extensive plyos. So kind of like low intensity, high volume. Think like, jump rope is like a great example of an extensive plyo, just to help build the ankle complex, the calf fatigue resistance, the Achilles fatigue resistance, and just all those intrinsic muscles of the foot and ankle complex. Like we do a lot of extensive plyos. We do a lot of single leg, back and forth, side to side, diagonal, just to help build resiliency through, again, ankle complex and the knee. And we're able to do it in high volumes because it's that extensive plyos. Then we do intensive plyos as well, which is more of like your traditional vertical jumps, broad jumps, box jumps, things like that. But with a lot of people, I really emphasize the deceleration part, the eccentric part, sticking the landing, controlling the knee. Like all of those things I think are massively undervalued and not programmed enough. And like that is what's helping build resiliency when it comes to downhill hiking, is building up those tissues to be able to handle those forces, because it's high forces. Like we're not talking about just whatever. We're talking about really, really high force production and force absorption needed on downhill, just normal downhill hiking. So we want to try to replicate that in the gym with our strength training, with our plyometrics, which is what we do, and which I think is very fun. But we got one more. This is another great one, but prioritize recovery. Or I'll even say it like this, periodize recovery. What do you got on that one?
I think it ties back into our global fatigue argument. I think over the course of a long season, it's very easy for the nervous system to have had the upper limit of its demands placed on it, man. Like if you're doing hikes at the mid-end of the season, these are just things to be way more mindful of. I'm in no way, shape, or form ever telling somebody that anything I say is going to change what their life is like on the fire line. The demands are going to be the demands. You're going to do what you need to do. But it gives you an added layer of how important it is to make sure you prioritize recovery, getting adequate nutrients every shift. When you can, prioritize that sleep instead of staying on your phone the extra hour or two. When you can, on your R&Rs, try not to drink all 3 days. Like all these things just become additive in terms of the cumulative stress happening on the body. And over the course of a very long career in the fire service, if you want your knees, if you want your ankles, if you want your hips, you want your low back to be more resilient, you can't go in to these very harsh, like we just talked about, super stressful activities like downhill hiking without having the mindset that you are an athlete. You're a tactical athlete. The demands are high as shit on you at all times. And if you're not prepared for that, global fatigue is going to set in. Fatigued people don't move well. When we're fatigued, we compensate. When we're fatigued, we don't recruit properly. We disengage a lot of these principles that help us move safely. So over the course of season, if you're moving suboptimally throughout a large portion of your season, just because you're cumulatively battling fatigue, it's not going to pay dividends for you in your long-term health. So that's the last point I'll say. Just treat the demands with the respect they deserve.
That was great. I think it's a great spot to end the episode here. And just to kind of summarize everything, there's so much more that goes into hiking performance than hiking. Everything you do before and after, in between hikes, PT, on incidents, there's so many factors that go into being a better hiker, being a more efficient hiker, and reducing unnecessary stress, all of these things that we've been talking about. So hope this episode is helpful. If you're listening to this and you want more, check out our high performance hiking course. We go in depth on all kinds of things from program design to work capacity development to the metabolic demands. We cover more studies. It's a great option to dive deeper onto this. You can check out what we have that's for free, which is our performance or our program design module, and then work capacity development mini course. So a lot of the stuff we've been talking about, but you can go back and digest it that way. So hopefully you're going to be a better hiker now after listening to this.
Yeah, thanks for listening, y'all.